Every year, hundreds of people go missing in our national and state parks. Of these, many disappear under very strange circumstances. A former police detective named David Paulides in the Can-Am Missing Project, after thousands of hours of investigation and research into these cases, have put together a book and film series called Missing 411, and we'll leave links to their website in the description below. So now, on to the story. On September 24, 2010, 39-year-old Todd Hoflander, with his black lab Ruby, traveled to the Seven Devils Mountains in Idaho to scout for the upcoming deer season. Todd and his friend Jeff would end up camping over the weekend and walking between the Sheep Creek and McGaffey basins during their scouting trips. On the morning of the 27th, the two men were above the area known as the McGaffey Cow Camp when Todd started to complain of pain in his knees because of all the hiking they were doing. Todd and Jeff decided to split up, with Todd and the dog taking the easier trail down to the Snake River and McGaffey Cabin, while Jeff continued on toward Sheep Creek and then to the river. The original plan was that Todd would wait at McGaffey Cabin while Jeff got a boat and drove it down the Snake River to pick him up. Jeff walked north along the ridges until he eventually made it to Sheep's Creek, and then arrived at the Snake River. There he flagged down a passing boat and hitched a ride to Pittsburgh Landing. There Jeff met his father, Steve, and the two headed down the river in Steve's boat. When they made it to the McGaffey cabin later that afternoon, Todd was nowhere to be found. The two searched up the trail from the cabin to find Todd, but had no luck. They made it roughly 3 miles up the trail before darkness fell, which prevented them from going any farther. They returned to the McGaffey cabin and spent the night there. The next morning, September 28th, Jeff and Steve used the boat to search the area between the cabin and Sheep Creek, scanning the shoreline in the event that Todd came out of one of the other drainages that empty out into the Snake River. They continued searching until noon when they decided to return to Riggins and notify authorities. The sheriff started an organized search and rescue operation that same afternoon, using a helicopter to search the creeks and drainages that Todd was suspected to be in. 3 additional teams with horses and mules were sent out the next day beginning in the Windy Saddle area. The Air Force was also contacted to fly over the area using thermal imaging. Notes from the first day of the search talked of how rugged the Seven Devils Wilderness is, with elevations going from 1,200 feet at the Snake River to over 7,500 feet at the Windy Saddle Trailhead, and being very steep with cliffs up to 1,800 feet high. The vegetation ranged from thick brush and canopy at the river to steep rocky ledges at the higher elevations. Temperatures were moderate at that time, with lows in the 50s at night and highs in the mid-80s during the afternoon. There were many hiking trails in the area, but traffic was low due to the season. On the morning of the 29th, the team started at the Windy Saddle Trailhead and headed toward the McGaffey Basin. A dog team arrived that morning and began searching using pieces of Todd's clothing. The team continued searching into the night with the handlers using handheld thermal imaging devices, but none of the search teams came up with anything useful. On October 6th, 11 days after Todd vanished, deputies spoke with a man named Tom Lindsay. No one seems to know exactly how he was involved in the search, but he claimed that his dowsing rods had told him that Todd was near Bernard Creek, which runs parallel to the trail that Todd was supposed to be on. Lindsay said that when investigators looked up Bernard Creek from the Snake River, Todd would be found in the first draw on the right and claimed that he would be found alive. 2 days later, on October 8th, the sheriff got a call from someone saying they found a dead dog floating in the Snake River a few days before. They said it looked like the dog had been skinned, and the man said he had taken pictures of it. but he wasn't sure if this dog could be Todd's. The next day, police interviewed Todd's friend Jeff at the Reagan Sheriff's Department to establish a timeline of what had happened in the days before Todd's disappearance. Jeff produced photos he had taken during their trip which proved that Todd was alive and well in the days leading up to his disappearance. After the interview, Jeff was asked to take a polygraph test, and he agreed. At around the same time, Jeff's father Steve contacted the sheriff and was irate that his son was being accused of being involved with a potential murder after spending more than a week searching for him. After the polygraph was complete, deputies and the examiner sat down with Jeff to go over the results. The examiner said that deception was indicated throughout the test and that Jeff had failed. The interview continued, and Jeff kept insisting he was telling the truth and that something was wrong with the polygraph machine. He said that the photos he had of the days leading up proved his story, but this interview did bring some new facts to light. Apparently, Todd was carrying a .44 Magnum revolver in a shoulder holster. This revolver was custom-made and had belonged to Todd's father, who had retired from the California Highway Patrol. Jeff said that Todd had the weapon when they separated and continued pleading his innocence. About that time, Jeff's father Steve entered the room and told Jeff they were leaving, and the interview ended there. On October 13th, police interviewed Todd's wife Julie, which supplied a lot of details about Todd's life, but not much that seemed relevant to the disappearance. However, what investigators found interesting was the relationship that Todd had with Jeff and Steve. Apparently, Jeff and Steve would invite Todd on fishing trips or some other kind of outing, and then all of a sudden cancel or change the dates. Then they would call Todd and be like, "Guess where we are?" and tell him all about the trip that Todd was supposed to be on with them. Julie said that there was just something about Jeff that made her generally uncomfortable, and that he viewed dogs as tools and regularly beat his. On October 15th, hikers along Seven Devils Road had stopped for lunch in a parking area near mile marker 15. While there, they noticed a black lab come down a nearby hill and begin pacing, whining, and growling. The hikers had heard about Todd and his dog being missing, and so they used their food to try to lure the dog over to him, and started yelling "Todd" and "Ruby," which got the dog excited. The hikers searched the surrounding area, yelling out for Todd but getting no response, so they drove the dog into Riggins to the sheriff's office. Deputies noted that the dog looked very healthy with a shiny coat, and appeared to be adequately fed. The dog had no noticeable cuts or abrasions, and was not wearing a collar. When Todd was last seen, Ruby was reported to be wearing a collar and a blue dog pack. Todd's wife Julie was contacted, and she and the two kids came to the sheriff's office to identify the dog. As soon as the kids started saying Ruby's name, the dog ran right over to them. Julie then confirmed that this was Todd's dog. Search teams took Ruby back to the area where she was found the next day, thinking perhaps she would lead them to Todd, but their attempts were unsuccessful. On the 19th, police met with Julie and explained where Ruby had been found and talked about their plans for searches over the next 2 days to cover the area. Julie asked investigators to talk to a psychic detective from California, who she had paid $500 for information. Deputies contacted this psychic, who said that Todd had a lot of inner anger and owed a great debt. This woman went on to say that Jeff had inadvertently shot and killed Todd while hunting, and in a panic buried him. She said that the site of Todd's grave is in the area around the Indian Trail Ridge. Police continued with search teams in the area for 18 days, covering nearly every area they could. At any one time, there were up to 7 dog teams on the ground, who often kept searching until the dogs were unable to continue due to exhaustion. With the search teams exhausted and no other viable options, the search was officially terminated on October 21st, with investigators no closer to finding Todd than when they began. The only clue found throughout the search was the discovery of the dog. That particular area had been searched by ground teams, dog teams, and flown over numerous times by airplane. Sadly, Nearly 10 years would go by before investigators got any new clues. On April 27, 2020, a hunter in the Bernard Creek area found what was believed to be human remains, along with a backpack and a camera. The hunter took the camera and turned it into the sheriff's office. There they found pictures of Todd on the SD card. The hunter then led deputies to the area by boat, which was about 200 feet on the opposite side of Bernard Creek from the trail that Todd had been on. Deputies found the pack and the items inside matched the description of those that Todd had been carrying. Not much was left of the remains, only part of the skull, a couple ribs, shoulder blade, and part of the upper arm were all that were found. The area was heavily wooded, and helicopters flying over would not have been able to see Todd on the ground. Investigators fanned out in all directions from the remains and searched for any other additional clues, but found none. Oddly, Todd's boots and weapon were missing. Deputies processed the scene and took the pack, items, and remains back to Riggins. The pack and the items inside were shown to Todd's wife, Julie, who identified everything as belonging to Todd. DNA analysis would show that the remains were that of Todd Hoflander. Obviously, with only partial remains, a cause of death couldn't be determined. So what happened to Todd Hoflander? The clues we do have seem to point in all different directions. Todd's movements prior to his disappearance are all based on the word of his companion Jeff, who failed his polygraph test, but did participate in the search. Even though the Bernard Creek area where Todd was found was heavily forested, and it would have been impossible for a helicopter crew to see Todd on the ground with the naked eye, why wasn't he picked up by thermal imaging? The area had been flown over many, many times over the 3-week search effort. Why did the dog teams not find him when there were up to 7 separate dog teams on the ground at any one time? Police appeared to be correct in their skepticism of the psychic detective story. This woman said that Todd would be found buried in the Indian Trail Ridge area, which was nowhere near where Todd was actually found. However, Tom Lindsay, who told police at the investigation's onset that his dowsing rods had told him that looking up Bernard Creek from the Snake River, Todd would be found alive in the first draw to the right. Even though Todd was found to be deceased, this area was very close to where the remains were discovered. Coincidence? A good guess? Why did Todd end up leaving the trail to the McGaffey cabin and crossing Bernard Creek while he was nursing a bad knee? If he was alive the next day when the search began, why didn't he move back to the trail? Why were his clothing and supplies in such good condition when found 10 years later? None of the gear showed any evidence of an animal attack. And finally, where are his boots and his weapon? The holster was found amongst his belongings, but the revolver was never found. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments below. So, that's going to do it for this episode of the Sheldrake Files. As always, if this is the kind of content you're into, please drop us a like and make sure you subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our content uploads. If you have any story suggestions, I can be reached by direct message on these social media platforms, so let us know if there's a story you'd like to hear. And so, from all of us here at the Sheldrake Files, thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.